The Golden Eagle Saloon sat on the corner of Main Street like an old dog that had seen better days. Its wooden floors creaked under every footstep, and the brass fixtures had turned green with age. Behind the bar stood Marcus Chen, a man of average height with graying temples and hands that never seemed to shake. No matter how busy the night got, Marcus had been tending bar at the Golden Eagle for 3 years now. He was the kind of bartender people barely noticed, quiet, efficient, and always listening more than talking. He mixed drinks with precise movements, wiped down glasses until they sparkled, and handled rowdy customers with calm words instead of raised voices. The regulars knew him as a steady presence who remembered their usual orders and never gossiped about their troubles. On this particular Friday evening, the saloon buzzed with its usual crowd of factory workers, office employees, and weekend warriors looking to blow off steam. The jukebox played classic rock while pool balls clacked together in the corner. Marcus moved behind the bar like a dancer who knew every step by heart, serving drinks and making small talk when customers seemed to need it. Everything changed when the Riverside crew walked in. The Riverside crew wasn't an official gang, just 5 guys in their 20s who thought they owned whatever bar they entered. They worked construction during the day and spent their evenings proving how tough they were to anyone who would watch. Jake Morrison led the group, a broad-shouldered man with tattooed arms and a mouth that never seemed to close. His friends followed him like hungry dogs, feeding off his energy and looking for trouble wherever they could find it. They claimed a table near the back, already loud from whatever they had been drinking before arriving. Marcus noticed them immediately but continued his work, hoping they would keep to themselves. He had dealt with troublemakers before, and the best strategy was usually to give them what they wanted and let them drink themselves into a stupor. Jake slammed his empty beer bottle on the table and gestured toward the bar. "Hey, quiet man, we need another round over here." Marcus nodded and pulled 5 cold beers from the cooler. He loaded them onto a tray and walked over to their table, setting the bottles down without making eye contact. This was another strategy he had learned. Avoid direct confrontation whenever possible. "What's your name, bartender?" Jake asked, leaning back in his chair. "Marcus," he replied simply, already turning to head back to the bar. "Marcus what? You got a last name, or are you one of those mysterious types?" "Chen. Marcus Chen." Jake's eyes lit up with cruel amusement. "Chen? What kind of name is that? You some kind of foreign guy trying to fit in around here?" The other members of the crew snickered. Marcus had heard worse, but something about Jake's tone made his jaw tighten slightly. Still, he kept walking toward the bar. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Jake called out louder, causing other customers to look over. "Don't you walk away when someone's having a conversation with you." Marcus stopped and turned around slowly. "Is there something else you need?" "Yeah, there is. I need you to show some respect when people are trying to be friendly. We come in here, we spend our money, and you act like we're bothering you. I apologize if I seemed rude. Can I get you anything else?" Jake stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "You know what I think? I think you're one of those guys who thinks he's better than everyone else, acting all quiet and mysterious like you got some big secret." Marcus remained perfectly still. His breathing was controlled, his hands relaxed at his sides. To most observers, he looked completely calm, but there was something in his eyes that might have warned Jake to back down, if Jake had been sober enough to notice. "I just want to do my job," Marcus said quietly. "Your job?" Jake laughed and looked around at his friends. "Did you hear that? His job is to serve us drinks and be polite about it, but instead he acts like we're dirt under his shoes." One of Jake's friends, a skinny guy named Tommy, stood up too. "Maybe he thinks he's some kind of tough guy. You know, the strong, silent type from the movies. Is that what you think you are?" Jake stepped closer to the bar. "Some kind of action hero?" Marcus began wiping down the bar with a clean rag, his movements steady and methodical. "I think I'm a bartender who wants to avoid trouble." "Trouble?" Jake slammed his hand down on the bar, making several glasses jump. "Who said anything about trouble? We're just trying to have a friendly conversation with the hired help." The saloon had grown quieter now. Regular customers were watching the scene unfold, some looking concerned, others reaching for their phones. Marcus knew this situation was escalating beyond his control, but he also knew that responding with aggression would only make things worse. "Look," Marcus said, setting down his rag, "why don't I buy your table around? On the house. Just let me get back to work." Jake's face twisted into a sneer. "Oh, now he wants to buy us drinks." "What's wrong, Chen?" Finally figured out you need to kiss up to the paying customers? I'm just trying to keep everyone happy. Everyone happy? Jake laughed again, louder this time. You know what would make me happy? If you stopped acting like you're some kind of mystery man and told us what your deal is. Where'd you come from? What did you do before you started pouring drinks for a living? Marcus's hands had stopped moving. For just a moment, something flickered across his face. A shadow of memory, perhaps, or recognition of a question he had hoped never to answer. But the moment passed so quickly that only the most observant person would have caught it. I worked different jobs, he said simply. Different jobs? Tommy chimed in from the table. Like what, fast food? Gas station? Some kind of office work? Various things. Jake moved even closer, now standing directly in front of the bar. You know what I think? I think you're hiding something. Maybe you got fired from your last job. Maybe you did something embarrassing and now you're stuck slinging drinks in a dump like this. The insults continued, each one designed to provoke a reaction. But Marcus just stood there, absorbing the verbal assault like a stone wall absorbs waves. His silence seemed to frustrate Jake even more, driving him to push harder, speak louder, and get more creative with his taunts. Neither Jake nor his friends realized they were about to discover just how wrong their assumptions were about the quiet man behind the bar. The harassment continued for another 20 minutes. Jake and his crew had found their entertainment for the evening, and they weren't about to let it go. They ordered drinks just to call Marcus over, then peppered him with increasingly personal questions and mocking comments about his appearance, his accent, and his obvious desire to avoid confrontation. I bet this guy's never been in a real fight in his life, Jake announced to his friends, loud enough for the entire bar to hear. Look at him. Probably runs away the second someone raises their voice. Marcus continued serving other customers, but the Riverside crew made sure to interrupt every interaction. When he tried to help an elderly regular named Frank order his usual whiskey, Tommy called out, "Hey Chen, Frank doesn't want a drink from some scared little mouse. Get someone else to serve him." Frank, a retired mechanic who had been coming to the Golden Eagle for 15 years, looked embarrassed. "Marcus is fine," he said quietly, but Tommy wasn't finished. No. Frank deserves better service than this. What if there was an emergency, Frank? What if someone tried to rob this place? You think our mystery man here would protect you? Or would he hide behind the bar like a scared little kid? Jake picked up on his friend's theme immediately. That's a great question, Tommy. Hey Chen, what would you do if someone came in here with a gun? Would you be our big hero? Or would you wet yourself and beg for mercy? The question hit differently than the previous insults. Marcus's hands paused for just a fraction of a second as he poured Frank's whiskey. It was such a small reaction that most people wouldn't have noticed, but Jake was watching carefully now, looking for any crack in Marcus's composure. Did you hear me? Jake pressed. I asked you a question about guns. You seem nervous all of a sudden. I'm not nervous, Marcus replied, handing Frank his drink. Really? Because you got real quiet when I mentioned guns. Maybe you don't like thinking about violence. Maybe you're one of those peace, love, and happiness types who thinks the world would be better if we all just held hands and sang songs. Jake's friends laughed and started making exaggerated peace signs with their fingers. Peace, man, Tommy said in a mocking hippie voice. Violence is never the answer, man. Marcus cleaned glasses and said nothing. But Frank, who had served 2 tours in Vietnam, was getting angry on the bartender's behalf. Why don't you boys find something better to do than pick on someone who's just trying to work? Frank said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen real trouble. Jake turned his attention to the old veteran. Oh, we got ourselves a white knight. Frank, is it? You think you need to protect poor little Marcus here? I think you need to grow up and leave people alone. Leave people alone? Jake laughed. We're not hurting anybody. We're just having a conversation with the bartender, asking him about his mysterious past, trying to figure out what his deal is. Frank sipped his whiskey and shook his head. In my day, we knew how to mind our own business. Your day? Jake stood up and walked toward the bar. What day was that, old man? Back when everything was black and white and simple? Well, this is our day now, and we do things differently. Marcus watched the situation carefully. Frank was in his 70s and walked with a cane. If Jake decided to get physical, the old man wouldn't be able to defend himself. This was exactly the kind of escalation Marcus had been trying to avoid. Frank's right, Marcus said quietly. Maybe it's time you and your friends headed home. Jake spun around to face him. Did you just tell us to leave? I suggested it might be time. You suggested? Jake's voice rose to a near shout. Who do you think you are to suggest anything to us? We're customers. We're paying customers and you're nothing but hired help. Other patrons were definitely uncomfortable now. A young couple near the window had already paid their bill and left. Two men playing pool had stopped their game to watch the confrontation. The atmosphere in the Golden Eagle had shifted from relaxed to tense. You want to know what I think? Jake continued, now standing directly in front of Marcus with only the bar between them. I think you're exactly what you look like. A scared little man who ended up in a dead-end job because he couldn't cut it anywhere else. I think you probably got picked on in school, and now you hide behind this bar hoping nobody notices what a loser you are. Marcus's expression never changed, but something subtle shifted in his posture. He stood a little straighter and his shoulders seemed to broaden slightly. Jake noticed the change and interpreted it as fear. Oh, now I got your attention. Finally hit a nerve, did I? What happened, Chen? Did you flunk out of college? Get fired from some office job? Or maybe you never amounted to anything in the first place? I did my job, Marcus said simply. What job? Flipping burgers? Stocking shelves? Come on, mystery man. Tell us about this amazing career you had before you ended up serving drinks to your betters. Marcus set down the glass he had been cleaning. For the first time all evening, he looked directly into Jake's eyes. I was a soldier. Jake blinked, momentarily thrown off by the direct answer. But he recovered quickly. A soldier? Oh, this is rich. Let me guess. You spent 2 years filing paperwork on some base in Kansas, and now you want everyone to think you're G.I. Joe. I served overseas. Overseas. Jake turned to his friends with exaggerated excitement. Did you hear that? Our boy Chen here is a war hero. Probably spent his tour hiding in the mess hall, peeling potatoes and staying as far away from danger as possible. Tommy joined in again. What branch, Chen? The Salvation Army? The crew erupted in laughter at their own joke. But Frank wasn't laughing anymore. Something in Marcus's tone and the way he had answered the questions had caught the old veteran's attention. Army, Marcus said quietly. Army what? Jake demanded. Infantry? Supply? Don't tell me you were some kind of special forces guy because I'm not buying it. Marcus returned to cleaning glasses. Just Army, Jake repeated mockingly. You know what I think? I think you're lying. I think you made up this whole soldier story to try to sound tough, because you don't look like any soldier I've ever seen. Frank set his whiskey glass down on the bar with enough force to get everyone's attention. Son, he said to Jake, you might want to be careful about calling people liars when you don't know what you're talking about. Jake turned back to the old man. And you might want to mind your own business before you get yourself in trouble. Trouble? Frank almost smiled. Boy, I've seen more trouble than you could imagine in 3 lifetimes. And I'm telling you, you're making a mistake. What kind of mistake? Frank looked at Marcus, then back at Jake. The kind where you assume you know someone based on how they look or act. Sometimes the quietest people are quiet for very good reasons. Jake laughed, but there was less confidence in it now. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Frank said, finishing his whiskey, that maybe you should take the bartender's suggestion and head home before you learn something you'd rather not know. The words hung in the air like smoke, creating a moment of uncertainty that neither Jake nor his friends quite knew how to handle. Jake stared at Frank for a long moment, trying to decide whether the old man was bluffing or if there was something more to his warning. The uncertainty made him angry, and when Jake got angry, he got louder and more aggressive. You know what? I'm tired of these games, he said, turning back to Marcus. I'm tired of mysterious hints and quiet tough guys and old men who think they know secrets. You want to pretend you're some kind of soldier? Prove it. Marcus continued cleaning glasses, but his movements had become more deliberate, more controlled. There's nothing to prove. Nothing to prove? Jake reached across the bar and grabbed the rag out of Marcus's hands. I think there's plenty to prove. See, I've got friends who served in the army, and they don't act like scared little mice when someone asks them about it. They're proud of what they did. They tell stories and show off their medals and talk about their buddies. Marcus looked down at his empty hands, then back up at Jake. Give me the rag. Give you the rag? Jake held it up mockingly. What are you going to do if I don't? Are you going to use your super-secret army training on me? The question was meant as a joke, but something in Marcus's eyes made Jake's smile falter slightly. There was a coldness there, a calculation that hadn't been present before. I'm asking politely, Marcus said. Politely. Jake threw the rag on the floor behind the bar. There's your rag, soldier boy. Why don't you crawl back there and get it? Marcus didn't move to retrieve the rag. Instead, he placed both hands flat on the bar and leaned forward slightly. You need to leave now, or what? The question hung in the air for several seconds. Marcus didn't answer immediately, and in that silence, something shifted in the atmosphere of the Golden Eagle. Even Jake's friends seemed to sense it. The sudden tension, the way other customers were either leaving or moving to tables farther away from the bar. Or nothing, Marcus said finally. I'm not going to fight you. I'm just telling you that you need to leave. Jake interpreted this as weakness and pressed his advantage. That's what I thought. All talk, no action, just like every other fake tough guy I've ever met. He turned to address the room, raising his voice so everyone could hear. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Marcus Chen, the mysterious soldier bartender. Watch as he demonstrates his amazing ability to back down from any challenge. A few nervous chuckles came from the crowd, but most people were watching with growing discomfort. This had gone beyond simple harassment and was heading toward something uglier. Tommy stood up from the table and walked over to join his friend. You know what I think, Jake? I think our boy Marcus here might have been in the army, but not the way he wants us to believe. What do you mean? I mean, maybe he was the kind of soldier who got court-martialed. Maybe he was the kind who couldn't hack it and got thrown out for being a coward. Jake's eyes lit up with cruel delight. Oh, that's good. That would explain everything, wouldn't it? The mystery, the reluctance to talk about his service, the way he backs down from every confrontation. Marcus had gone completely still. His hands remained flat on the bar, but every muscle in his body seemed coiled, ready for action. Frank noticed the change immediately and started reaching for his cane, preparing to get out of the way if necessary. Is that what happened, Chen? Jake leaned further across the bar, bringing his face close to Marcus's. Did you wash out of basic training? Did you run away when things got tough? Did you get yourself and your buddies in trouble because you couldn't do your job? The last question hit something deep. Marcus's breathing changed almost imperceptibly, becoming more controlled, more rhythmic. It was the kind of breathing pattern taught in military training, designed to maintain focus under extreme stress. You don't know what you're talking about, Marcus said quietly. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I can see it in your eyes, Chen. You're carrying around some kind of guilt, aren't you? Something bad happened over there, and it was your fault. Tommy joined in with renewed enthusiasm. Maybe he got someone killed. Maybe he was supposed to watch someone's back, but he was too scared to do his job. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. His knuckles went white where they pressed against the bar, and for just a moment his carefully maintained composure cracked. A flash of something, pain, rage, memory, crossed his face before he could hide it. Jake saw the reaction and knew he had found the weak spot he'd been looking for. That's it, isn't it? You got someone killed because you were a coward, and now you're hiding out here, pouring drinks and pretending to be normal, hoping nobody finds out what you really are. Stop, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Stop what? Stop telling the truth? Stop pointing out that you're nothing but a washed-up failure who couldn't cut it when it mattered. Frank had heard enough. Despite his age and the risk to himself, he stood up and moved toward the confrontation. That's enough. You boys need to back off right now. Jake whirled around to face him. Sit down, old man, before you get hurt. The only person who's going to get hurt here is you if you keep pushing. Is that a threat? It's a warning. From someone who's seen enough combat to recognize the signs. Jake looked back and forth between Frank and Marcus, confusion evident on his face. What signs? What are you talking about? Frank moved closer, his cane tapping against the floor with each step. I'm talking about the way he's breathing, the way he's standing, the way his hands are positioned. I'm talking about the fact that you've been poking at a dangerous animal for the last hour, and you're too stupid to realize it. Dangerous animal? Jake laughed, but there was less confidence in it now. This guy? He won't even defend himself when someone throws his rag on the floor. That's not because he can't, Frank said quietly. That's because he's trying very hard not to. The words created a moment of silence that seemed to stretch forever. In that silence, everyone in the Golden Eagle became aware of something they hadn't noticed before. The absolute stillness of the man behind the bar. The controlled way he was breathing. The coiled tension in his posture that suggested explosive potential held carefully in check. Jake looked at Marcus again, this time with something approaching uncertainty. But he had gone too far to back down now without losing face in front of his friends and everyone else in the bar. "You're all crazy," he said, but his voice had lost some of its earlier bravado. "This guy's nothing but a scared bartender who tells war stories to make himself feel important." Marcus finally moved. He reached down and picked up the rag Jake had thrown behind the bar. He folded it neatly and set it on the counter. Then he looked directly at Jake with eyes that had gone completely cold. "Last chance," he said simply. "Last chance for what?" Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. The question hung in the air like a challenge, and everyone in the Golden Eagle suddenly understood that they were about to witness something that would change everything. The tension in the Golden Eagle had become so thick it was almost suffocating. Jake found himself caught between his need to maintain his tough guy image and a growing sense that he might have pushed things too far. But with his friends watching and half the bar paying attention, backing down wasn't really an option. "You know what?" Jake said, trying to inject some false confidence back into his voice. "I'm getting tired of your mysterious tough guy act. If you're really some kind of badass soldier, then prove it. Show us what you can do." Marcus remained perfectly still. "You don't want me to do that." "Yeah, I do. I really do. Because I think you're all bluff and I want everyone here to see it." Frank had positioned himself near the emergency exit, his military instincts telling him to get clear of whatever was about to happen. "Son," he called to Jake, "this is your last warning. Walk away now." From him, Jake gestured dismissively toward Marcus. "From a bartender who's too scared to defend his own honor?" "He's not scared," Frank said quietly. "He's controlled. There's a big difference." Tommy, emboldened by his friend's bravado, decided to escalate things further. He walked behind the bar without permission, invading Marcus's workspace. "Maybe we need to get a closer look at our mysterious soldier boy." Marcus tracked Tommy's movement with his eyes but didn't turn his body. "Get out from behind my bar, or what? What are you going to do about it?" Tommy started opening cabinets and drawers, making a show of searching through Marcus's personal belongings. "Let's see what secrets our war hero is hiding back here." In the third drawer he opened, Tommy found something unexpected, a small wooden box with military insignia carved into its lid. His eyes widened with cruel delight as he held it up for everyone to see. Well, well, well. What do we have here?" Marcus's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The careful control he had maintained all evening disappeared, replaced by something much more dangerous. "Put that down." "Put it down?" Tommy opened the box and peered inside. "Oh, this is interesting. Looks like medals. Real military medals." Jake moved closer to see what his friend had found. "Let me see those." Tommy pulled out a medal and held it up to the light. It was a Bronze Star, its ribbon faded but still recognizable. "Bronze Star Medal," he read from the inscription. "For heroic or meritorious achievement in a combat zone." "Heroic achievement?" Jake laughed. "Our boy Chen actually got himself a participation trophy." Marcus had gone completely rigid. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, and every person with military experience in the bar could see that he was fighting an internal battle between restraint and action. Tommy continued rifling through the box, pulling out more medals and ribbons. "Silver Star, Purple Heart, Combat Infantryman Badge." His voice grew more mocking with each discovery. "Wow, Chen, you really collected the whole set, didn't you?" "Those are mine," Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. "Were yours," Tommy corrected. "Looks like you abandoned them in a drawer, just like you probably abandoned your buddies when things got tough." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Several customers had moved toward the exits now, sensing that the situation was about to explode into violence. Frank was gripping his cane tightly, ready to use it as a weapon if necessary. Jake picked up another medal from the box, a Distinguished Service Cross, one of the highest decorations the Army could award. But he didn't recognize its significance and treated it like just another piece of junk. "You know what I think these are?" Jake announced to the room. "I think these are fake. I think our boy Chen here bought them at some surplus store so he could pretend to be a war hero." Marcus took a step forward, and something in his movement made Tommy instinctively step back. But Jake was too committed to his performance to recognize the warning signs. "That's right, isn't it, Chen? You bought these medals to fool people into thinking you were something special. But the truth is, you never saw any real action. You never did anything heroic. You're just a fake and a liar." "Those medals," Frank called out from across the room, "don't get awarded to fakes and liars." "Says who?" Jake shot back. How do we know they're real? Frank had served long enough to recognize military decorations when he saw them. Because I know what they are. That Distinguished Service Cross your friend is waving around? That's the second highest decoration for valor in the entire U.S. military. You don't get one of those for filing paperwork. Jake looked down at the medal in his hand with new uncertainty. This thing? That thing gets awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat. Usually posthumously. The word posthumously hung in the air like a warning bell. Jake suddenly realized he might be holding something that represented acts of courage he couldn't even imagine. But he had gone too far to stop now, so what? He said, trying to maintain his bravado. Even if they're real, that doesn't change anything. This guy's still nothing but a scared bartender who won't stand up for himself. Marcus moved again, this time coming around the end of the bar. His movements were fluid and controlled, like a predator closing in on prey. Every step was calculated, every muscle ready for action. Put the medals back in the box, he said quietly. Or what? Marcus stopped walking and stood perfectly still. When he spoke again, his voice had changed completely. Gone was the polite bartender's tone, replaced by something harder and more authoritative. I spent 6 years in the Army, 4 tours in Afghanistan. I was a designated marksman with the 75th Ranger Regiment. My job was to eliminate high-value targets from extreme long range. The confession hit the room like a shockwave. Jake's hand, still holding the Distinguished Service Cross, began to tremble slightly. Marcus continued, his voice remaining perfectly calm. I have confirmed kills from distances exceeding 1,000 meters. I can put a bullet through a man's head from 3/4 of a mile away. I am trained in 17 different methods of silent elimination, and I can kill you with my bare hands in under 30 seconds. Tommy had gone pale and was backing toward the front door. Several other customers had already left. The ones who remained were pressed against the walls, trying to stay as far away from the confrontation as possible. The reason I don't want to fight you, Marcus said, taking another step forward, isn't because I'm scared. It's because if I start, I won't be able to stop, and then I'll have to live with what I've done for the rest of my life. Jake's mouth had gone completely dry. The metal felt impossibly heavy in his hand. Now, Marcus said, extending his hand, give me back what's mine. For the first time all evening, Jake Morrison had nothing to say. Jake stood frozen, the Distinguished Service Cross trembling in his grip. The weight of Marcus's words had transformed the atmosphere in the Golden Eagle from tense to terrifying. Everyone in the bar now understood they were in the presence of someone whose capacity for violence far exceeded anything they had imagined. The medals, Marcus repeated, his voice carrying an authority that came from years of command in life-or-death situations. Jake's hand moved slowly toward Marcus, but his pride made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. You can't just threaten people like that. This is America. There are laws. You're right, Marcus said, accepting the medal and placing it carefully back in the box. There are laws. Breaking into someone's private workspace, stealing their personal property, and harassment are all violations of those laws. Tommy had pressed himself against the front door, ready to bolt at the first sign of movement. The other members of the Riverside crew had similarly positioned themselves near exits, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. But more than that, Marcus continued, gathering the remaining medals and ribbons that Tommy had scattered across the bar. There are rules about respect, rules about not pushing someone past their breaking point, rules about knowing when to stop. Jake watched as Marcus carefully arranged each decoration back in its proper place within the wooden box. The bronze star, the silver star, the purple heart, each one representing moments of courage and sacrifice that Jake couldn't begin to comprehend. I don't understand, Jake said weakly. If you did all those things, why are you working here? Why are you tending bar instead of what? Marcus closed the box and set it aside. Instead of trading on my military service to get respect I haven't earned in civilian life? Instead of using my past to intimidate people? Frank, who had remained near the emergency exit throughout the confrontation, spoke up. Some of us came home looking for peace, not more war. Marcus nodded toward the old veteran. Frank understands. When you've seen enough violence, sometimes the biggest challenge is learning how to live without it. But they were making fun of you, Jake said, confusion evident in his voice. They were calling you a coward. Words are just words. I know who I am and what I've done. I don't need to prove anything to strangers in a bar. The simple dignity of Marcus's response made Jake's earlier behavior seem even more shameful. He looked around the room at the faces watching him. Some angry, some pitying, all disappointed in what they had witnessed. I didn't know, Jake mumbled. You didn't want to know, Marcus corrected. You made assumptions based on how I looked and acted. You decided I was weak because I chose not to fight. You mistook restraint for cowardice. Tommy finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. We're sorry. We didn't mean to. You didn't mean to what? Humiliate someone in front of a room full of people? Destroy someone's personal property? Make fun of military service? The questions hung in the air unanswered. There was no good response because they had meant to do exactly those things. Marcus picked up a clean glass and began polishing it with mechanical precision. I came back from Afghanistan with more psychological scars than physical ones. I've spent 3 years learning how to be around people again, without seeing threats everywhere. I've worked hard to build a quiet life where I don't have to hurt anyone. Jake shifted uncomfortably. You were just bullying someone you thought couldn't fight back, Marcus interrupted. You saw a quiet guy who avoided conflict and you decided that made him an easy target. You never considered that maybe he avoided conflict for good reasons. The truth of the statement hit Jake like a physical blow. That was exactly what they had done, and there was no way to deny it or dress it up as something more noble. Here's what's going to happen now, Marcus said, setting down the glass and looking directly at each member of the Riverside crew. You're going to leave my bar. All of you. And you're not going to come back. But we're customers, Jake started to protest weakly. No, you're not. Customers treat staff with basic respect. Customers don't steal personal property or make threats. What you are is exactly what I spent 6 years fighting against. Bullies who use intimidation to get what they want. The comparison stung because it was accurate. Jake had always prided himself on being one of the good guys, but looking at his behavior through Marcus's eyes, he could see how wrong he had been. Look, I said, we're sorry. Can't we just forget this whole thing happened? Marcus shook his head slowly. Some things can't be forgotten. You crossed lines tonight that shouldn't be crossed. You made assumptions about someone's character based on incomplete information. You mocked military service and treated war medals like toys. Frank stepped forward, his cane tapping against the floor. Son, he said to Jake, do you have any idea what that man went through to earn those decorations? Jake remained silent. A Distinguished Service Cross means he risked his life to save other people, probably multiple times. A Silver Star means he showed gallantry in action against an armed enemy. Those aren't participation trophies, they're given to people who did things most of us couldn't even imagine doing. The weight of Frank's words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Jake began to understand the magnitude of his mistake, not just in terms of the harassment, but in terms of disrespecting sacrifices made on his behalf. I served 2 tours in Vietnam, Frank continued. I saw good men die trying to earn medals like those, and I saw what it cost the ones who lived to tell about it. Marcus nodded gratefully toward the old veteran, then turned his attention back to Jake. I don't want your apology because you're scared of what I might do to you. I want you to understand that your actions have consequences, and those consequences don't disappear just because you say you're sorry. Tommy finally worked up the courage to speak again. What do you want from us? I want you to leave. I want you to think about what happened here tonight. And I want you to remember this the next time you decide to pick on someone you think can't defend themselves. Jake looked around the room one more time, taking in the disappointed faces of the other customers, the protective stance of the old veteran, and the quiet dignity of the man he had so badly misjudged. We'll go, he said finally. But this isn't over. The threat was automatic, a last desperate attempt to salvage some pride from the wreckage of the evening. But as soon as the words left his mouth, Jake realized how hollow they sounded. Marcus didn't even blink. Yes, it is over. Because if I see any of you in here again, or if I hear that you've been bothering any other business owners or employees in this town, then we'll have a very different kind of conversation. The promise was delivered in the same quiet tone Marcus had used all evening, but now everyone understood the steel beneath the silk. This wasn't a bartender making empty threats. This was a trained soldier explaining the rules of engagement. Jake nodded reluctantly and gestured for his friends to follow him toward the door. They moved quickly, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere their own actions had created. As they reached the exit, Frank called out one final piece of advice. Boys, you might want to spend some time thinking about the difference between strength and weakness. Real strength is knowing when not to fight. What you showed tonight was just weakness disguised as toughness. The door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving the Golden Eagle in relative quiet. The remaining customers began to relax, conversations gradually resuming as the tension slowly dissipated. Marcus returned the wooden box to its drawer and resumed his position behind the bar. But something had fundamentally changed. The secret he had guarded so carefully for 3 years was now public knowledge, at least among the people who had witnessed the confrontation. The Golden Eagle felt different after the Riverside crew left. The tension that had filled the air for the past hour gradually dissipated, but it was replaced by something else, a mixture of respect, curiosity, and understanding that hadn't existed before. Frank was the first to break the silence. He walked back to his spot at the bar and settled onto his stool with a slight grunt. You handled that well, son. Better than I might have at your age. Marcus poured Frank another whiskey without being asked. I almost didn't handle it at all. For a minute there, I thought I might lose control. But you didn't. That's what matters. Other customers began to approach the bar, no longer seeing Marcus as just the quiet bartender who mixed their drinks. Sarah, a nurse who came in every Friday after her shift, was the first to speak up. I had no idea about your military service, she said softly. Thank you for what you did over there. Marcus nodded uncomfortably. I was just doing my job. Your job was protecting people like us, said Robert, a school teacher who had been playing pool when the confrontation started. That's not something to minimize. More people began to share their thoughts and gratitude. Marcus found himself in the strange position of being thanked for his service by people who had watched him serve them drinks for 3 years without knowing anything about his background. I have a nephew in Afghanistan right now, said Margaret, an elderly woman who rarely spoke to anyone. He's with the 82nd Airborne. Knowing there were people like you over there watching out for guys like him, it means something. The attention was overwhelming for Marcus, who had spent years trying to blend into the background. He appreciated the kind words, but part of him missed the anonymity he had cultivated so carefully. Frank seemed to understand his discomfort. All right, everyone, give the man some breathing room. He's still the same person he was an hour ago. He's just not hiding anymore. As the crowd dispersed back to their tables and conversations, Frank leaned closer to Marcus. How are you doing, really? Marcus considered the question carefully. Honestly, I'm not sure. I've been Marcus the bartender for 3 years. I'm not sure I remember how to be Marcus the soldier. You don't have to be Marcus the soldier, Frank said. You just have to be Marcus. All of him, not just the parts you thought people could handle. It was easier when they didn't know, when they just saw a quiet guy who mixed drinks and minded his own business. Frank chuckled. Easier, maybe, but not better. You've been carrying those medals around in a drawer like they were something to be ashamed of. They're not. They're part of who you are. Marcus picked up the wooden box and looked at it thoughtfully. I put them away because I didn't want people to think I was trading on my service. I didn't want anyone to treat me differently because of what I did in the army. And now? Now I'm not sure I have a choice. Half the town will know by tomorrow night. Frank finished his whiskey and stood up slowly. You know what I think? I think you've been so worried about people treating you like a hero that you forgot heroes are just people who did what needed to be done when it mattered most. As Frank made his way toward the door, Marcus called after him. Frank, why did you step in tonight? You could have been hurt. The old veteran paused at the entrance. Because I recognized something in your eyes when those boys started pushing. I saw the same thing in my mirror for about 20 years after I came home from Vietnam. What's that? The look of a man who's seen too much but is trying real hard to see good in the world anyway. After Frank left, the Golden Eagle settled into its normal Friday night rhythm. People played pool, couples talked over drinks, and the jukebox played classic rock. But there was an undercurrent of change. A sense that something significant had shifted. Marcus found himself having different kinds of conversations with customers. People asked about his service not out of morbid curiosity, but out of genuine interest and respect. He discovered that many of the regulars had their own military connections, family members, friends their own service around midnight. As Marcus was cleaning up for closing time, a young man approached the bar. He looked to be in his early 20s with the short haircut and posture that suggested military service. "Excuse me," he said nervously. "I heard about what happened here earlier. I'm home on leave from my second deployment in Afghanistan. I just wanted to say, well, thank you, and it's good to know there are people like you out there." Marcus shook the young soldier's hand. "What's your unit?" "But 3rd Airborne. We're working the Kunar province mostly. Tough area. You stay safe over there." "I will. And sir, what you said about coming home looking for peace instead of more war. I get that. I'm already thinking about what comes after, you know?" Marcus nodded. "It's not easy transitioning back, but it's possible. Just remember that being strong enough to fight doesn't mean you always have to." As the young soldier left, Marcus realized something important had changed in him too. For 3 years he had been hiding from his past, treating his military service like something to be ashamed of rather than honored. Tonight had forced him to confront not just the bullies who had harassed him, but his own relationship with his identity. He pulled out the wooden box one more time and opened it. The medals caught the light from the bar, each one representing moments of courage, sacrifice, and loss that had shaped him into the man he was today. They weren't symbols of violence. They were symbols of service, of a willingness to put others before himself. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus Chen felt like a complete person again. He was still the quiet bartender who listened more than he talked, and preferred avoiding conflict to seeking it. But now he was also the decorated soldier who had served his country with honor and courage. He didn't have to choose between those two parts of himself anymore. He could be both. As he locked up the Golden Eagle and headed home, Marcus reflected on the events of the evening. The Riverside crew had tried to tear him down by exposing what they thought was weakness, but instead, they had helped him reclaim something he hadn't realized he had lost: the integration of his past and present into a single, authentic identity. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new customers, but Marcus would face them as his complete self for the first time since coming home from the war. The quiet bartender and the decorated soldier were finally one and the same, and that made him stronger than he had ever been behind the bar of the Golden Eagle Saloon.